My hands still smelled like jet fuel. I scrubbed them 3 times in the Pentagon bathroom before heading to the country club, but the scent lingered beneath my cuticles, a ghost of the C-17 I'd inspected that morning at Dover. I pressed my palms flat against the steering wheel of my Honda Civic, studying the calluses on my right hand, where I'd gripped the flight stick for 18 hours during the Kabul evacuation. 4 years ago now. The scars had faded, but the muscle memory remained. The Pinehurst Country Club sat at the end of a long gravel drive, flanked by magnolias that dropped their bruised petals onto the walkway. It wasn't the kind of place that made you feel wealthy. It made you feel adequate, which was somehow worse. The building itself was all weathered cedar and warped windows, the kind of genteel decay that signaled old Southern money trying very hard not to look like it was trying. Through the wavy glass, I could see women in pastel linen, their laughter floating out like smoke. I was 43 years old. I had flown combat missions over 3 continents. I had commanded 200 personnel. And I was terrified of lunch with my stepmother. The thing about Diane, my father's second wife, installed 6 months after my mother's funeral when I was 19, was that she'd never actually asked what I did. Not once in 24 years. Early on, I tried to tell her. "I'm stationed at Ramstein," I'd said over Thanksgiving turkey. She'd smiled vaguely and said, "That's nice, dear. Pass the cranberry sauce." When I made captain, then major, she'd nod and change the subject to her bridge club. When I deployed, she'd tell her friends I was traveling for work. The truth was too inconvenient for her narrative. Diane collected daughters-in-law like china patterns. My half-brother Garrett's wife, Sloane, with her junior league pedigree, my half-sister Maria's husband, Preston, whose family owned half the car dealerships in the state. They fit. Their accomplishments could be explained at cocktail parties in 3 sentences or less. I was the problem child who'd never settled down, who had that job we don't discuss. My phone buzzed. A text from Garrett. "Mom said you're coming. Try not to wear your work boots. LOL. I looked down at my dove gray sundress, my simple pearl studs, my ballet flats. I'd stopped wearing my uniform to family events after Diane introduced me to one of her friends as my husband's daughter. She does something for the government. The friend had said, "Oh, how nice," with that glazed expression people get when they're already planning their exit from the conversation. I didn't correct her. What was the point? The hostess led me through the dining room, past tables full of women who'd known each other since cotillion. Diane had secured the corner table by the windows, the one that overlooked the 18th hole. She was already holding court. Sloane on her right, Mireya on her left, 2 other women I vaguely recognized from past gatherings. Everyone wore that careful shade of lipstick that said effortless, while costing $60. "Bryn!" Diane's voice carried across the room. She rose, air kissing near my cheeks, her Chanel No. 5 overwhelming the gardenias. "You made it. We were just talking about the charity gala. Sloane is chairing the auction this year." Sloane beamed. "We've already secured some incredible items, a weekend at the Greenbrier, a private wine tasting." I slid into my chair, smiled, murmured something appropriate. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. Diane's friend Margaret was talking about her daughter's wedding. Mireya was showing photos of her new lake house. I picked up my Cobb salad and tried to calculate how long I needed to stay before I could leave without causing offense. "Bryn, you're so quiet," Margaret said suddenly. "Diane says you travel a lot for work?" "Sometimes," I said carefully. "What is it you do again?" Margaret leaned forward, genuinely curious. "I know Diane mentioned it, but I can never quite remember." The table went quiet in that particular way that signaled everyone was paying attention while pretending not to. Diane's smile tightened at the corners. "I work for the government," I said. "Oh, doing what?" Diane's hand fluttered to her throat. "Oh, Margaret, Bryn doesn't like to talk about work. You know how private she is." "I'm just curious," Margaret persisted. "Is it interesting work?" Quote. I opened my mouth, but Diane cut in, her voice bright and brittle. It's very humble work, actually. Bryn has always been so unpretentious, not like some people who have to brag about their careers. She laughed, and the other women laughed with her, though the sound was uncomfortable. Margaret looked confused. But what? Margaret, did you try the salmon? Diane's subject change was smooth as glass. The chef here is divine. I felt it then, that old familiar exhaustion settling into my bones, not the physical kind that came from 18-hour flights or 3-day exercises. The soul-deep weariness of being erased over and over in small, polite increments. Margaret took the hint and changed the subject. The conversation moved on. I faded back into invisibility. 20 minutes later, Margaret excused herself to the restroom. I watched her go, then returned to pushing lettuce around my plate. The other woman at the table, Diane's friend Catherine, was showing photos of her grandson. I wasn't paying attention to their conversation until I heard Catherine say, "Oh, Margaret, there you are. We were just talking about Barbara's retirement party. Are you coming?" Margaret slid back into her seat, but her face looked odd, tight. She glanced at me, then at Diane, then back at Catherine. "Yes, I'll be there. Catherine, can I ask you something?" "Of course." Margaret's voice dropped, but in the quiet of our corner table, I heard every word. "Diane, I ran into Linda Whitmore in the ladies' room. She asked about your stepdaughter. I told her you had your whole family here for lunch." Diane's smile didn't waver. "That's nice." And then she asked what Bryn does for a living. I said I wasn't quite sure, and I asked if you'd ever mentioned it at Bridge Club. Something shifted in the air. Sloane had gone very still. Margaret continued, her voice careful. "Linda said you told the Bridge Club that..." She paused, glancing at me. "Well, that Bryn works in... maintenance?" Diane's laugh was too loud. "Oh, I'm sure Linda misunderstood. She said you were quite specific." Margaret's voice was quiet now, almost apologetic. "She said you told them." "Margaret, I think that's enough," Diane said sharply. But Margaret pressed on, and I realized with a cold clarity that she wasn't being malicious. She was genuinely confused, trying to reconcile something that didn't make sense. "Linda said at last month's Bridge Club, when someone asked about Bryn, you told them." Margaret looked directly at me now. "I'm sorry, Bryn, but I need to know if this is true. Did Diane tell people you..." "I think we should change the subject," Diane said. Her voice had gone high and thin. "That you clean toilets for a living?" The words dropped into the space between us like stones into still water. Sloane's fork clattered against her plate. Maria made a small sound. Catherine's mouth fell open. I looked at Diane. Her face had gone splotchy, red blooming across her cheeks and neck. She wouldn't meet my eyes. "Is that what you tell people?" I asked quietly. That's not. Linda must have." "Is that what you tell people?" I repeated. Diane's hands were shaking. "You never explained what you do." "You're always so vague, I had to tell them something." "So you told them I clean toilets." "I didn't mean it like..." "You don't understand, Bryn. These women, they ask questions, they expect answers, and you never give me anything to work with." "I've tried to tell you," I said. My voice was steady, but my hands were clenched in my lap. "For 24 years I've tried to tell you." "You use all that military jargon? I don't understand any of it." "You've never asked me to explain." Margaret was staring at Diane with something like horror. "Diane, you told us she cleans toilets. We've been pitying you for having a daughter who..." "Stepdaughter," Diane corrected automatically. Then seemed to realize what she'd said. "I didn't mean..." I stood. My chair scraped against the pine floor. "Excuse me, I need some air." I walked outside onto the veranda, my heels clicking on the weathered boards. The June heat hit me like a wall. I gripped the railing and stared at the 18th hole, at the absurdly green grass, at the little flags fluttering in the breeze. She told them I clean toilets. 24 years of being diminished, and I'd never known exactly how far it went. I'd imagined vague dismissals, uncomfortable subject changes. But this was active, deliberate humiliation. My phone buzzed in my purse. I ignored it. It buzzed again and again. Annoyed, I pulled it out. The number on my screen made my stomach drop. Joint Base Andrews. Major General Carver, I answered. Ma'am, this is Colonel Doherty at Andrews. We have a situation. His voice was tight. The Air Force One backup just failed its pre-flight inspection. Primary is already wheels up with POTUS, but we need the backup mission ready in 3 hours for the secondary package. You're closest to Davison Army Airfield. We need you airborne in 90 minutes. I closed my eyes. Of course this was happening now. What's the malfunction? Hydraulic system failure. We have the parts, but we need your eyes on the repair before we can certify it. And ma'am, he paused, SECDEF is in the secondary package. If we can't get that backup certified, we're scrubbing a meeting with the Prime Minister of Japan. I looked back through the window at my stepmother's table. Margaret was talking urgently, her hands gesturing. Diane was shaking her head. Sloane had both hands pressed to her mouth. 24 years of she cleans toilets. Send a bird to Pinehurst Country Club, I said. I'll be ready in 20 minutes. Ma'am? You heard me, Colonel. I'm at a family lunch. Send the helicopter to the golf course. Make it visible. There was a pause. Understood, ma'am. Blackhawk en route. ETA 18 minutes. I ended the call and walked back inside. The dining room felt smaller somehow, stifling. I could see my table in the corner. Margaret was standing now, her voice raised. Diane was crying. Other tables were starting to stare. I walked back to the table. All conversation stopped. I need to leave, I said quietly. Bryn, Diane reached for my arm. Please, I didn't mean. You told your bridge club I clean toilets. I said it calmly, factually. For 24 years, while I've been deployed to combat zones, while I've commanded thousands of people, while I've briefed members of Congress and flown missions that are still classified, you told your friends I clean toilets. I'm sorry. We don't talk about her, I continued, and Diane flinched because those were her words, thrown back at her. She cleans toilets, so embarrassing. Catherine made a choking sound. Margaret had tears in her eyes. That's what you said, isn't it? I asked. That I'm embarrassing? I was wrong. Yes, I said quietly, you were. And then I heard it. The rhythmic thump of rotor blades. It started as a distant percussion, barely audible over the ambient noise of the dining room, but it grew louder and louder. The windows began to vibrate. Conversations faltered across the entire restaurant. Someone pointed toward the golf course. Through the warped glass, I watched a UH-60 Blackhawk helicopter descend onto the manicured 18th hole, its downdraft turning the flag into a horizontal streamer. The Air Force star and bar insignia gleamed on its side. Golfers scattered. A maintenance cart tipped over. The entire dining room had gone silent. Every person was pressed against the windows. The helicopter settled onto the grass. The door opened. A young captain in flight suit stepped out, followed by 2 armed crew members. They moved with that particular military precision that made civilians nervous. The captain spotted me through the window and headed for the entrance. I picked up my purse, smoothed my dress. Behind me, I heard Diane whisper, "Oh my God." The captain appeared in the dining room doorway. Every head in the room swiveled toward him, then followed his gaze to me. He crossed the dining room in 6 strides and stopped at our table. His salute was crisp and perfect. "Major General, aircraft is ready when you are. Clear skies all the way to Andrews, ma'am." The room was so quiet I could hear someone's watch ticking. I returned his salute. "Thank you, Captain. I'll be right there." He nodded and stepped back, waiting. I turned to the table. Diane's face had gone the color of uncooked dough. Her mouth was opening and closing, but no sound was coming out. Sloane had both hands pressed to her cheeks. Mireya was staring at me like she'd never seen me before. Margaret was crying openly now. "Ladies," I said quietly, "I apologize for cutting lunch short. Duty calls." I took 1 step toward the door. Behind me, I heard a crash. I turned. Diane had tried to stand, but her knees had buckled. She'd grabbed for the table but missed, her shoulder hitting the dessert cart instead. It tipped sideways in slow motion. A 3-layer red velvet cake slid off its stand, hit the floor with a wet splat. Diane went down with it, landing hard on her knees in frosting and crumbs. "Diane!" Margaret dropped beside her. "Someone get water!" But Diane wasn't unconscious. Her eyes were open, staring up at me from the floor, red velvet frosting smeared across her cream silk blouse. Her face was a rictus of shock and shame and something that might have been understanding. Finally, far too late. "She cleans toilets," I said softly. Only Diane was close enough to hear. So embarrassing. Then I walked out. The helicopter's rotor wash hit me the moment I stepped outside, warm and powerful. The crew chief helped me up, handed me a headset. Through the window I could see the entire country club pressed against the glass. Diane was still on the floor, Sloane and Margaret trying to help her up. Her face was tilted toward the window, toward me, and even from this distance I could see she was sobbing. "Ready, ma'am?" the pilot asked through my headset. "Ready." We lifted off. The country club shrank beneath us, the magnolias, the weathered cedar, the women in their pastel linen all frozen at the windows. From this height, Diane was just a small figure in ruined silk, kneeling in cake. My phone buzzed. A text from Garrett. "What the hell, Mom just called me crying. What happened?" Another from Maria. Oh my God, please call me." Another from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Margaret Whitfield. I am so deeply sorry. I had no idea. Please, if there's anything I can do." I turned off my phone. The pilot's voice crackled in my headset. "Andrews in 45 minutes, ma'am. Colonel Doherty said the Secretary of Defense wanted to thank you personally for the quick response." "Copy that," I said. Below us, the green North Carolina landscape stretched out in a patchwork of pine forests and red clay. Somewhere down there, my stepmother was probably being helped into a bathroom, trying to wash frosting out of her hair, trying to explain to her friends how she'd never known, how I'd never told her, how it was all a terrible misunderstanding. Except it wasn't. She'd known exactly what she was doing, every time she'd changed the subject when I tried to explain my work, every time she'd introduced me as different or independent with that particular tone. Every time she'd told her bridge club, I cleaned toilets because it was easier than admitting she had a stepdaughter she didn't understand and hadn't bothered to learn about. I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. I didn't call anyone back for 3 days. The Air Force One backup situation took 48 hours to resolve: inspection, repair certification, secondary testing. I slept in my quarters at Andrews, ate mess hall food, and ignored my phone until the mission was complete and the Secretary of Defense's plane was wheels up to Tokyo. When I finally turned my phone back on, I had 97 messages. Most were from Garrett and Maria, increasingly frantic. Several from my father, who'd apparently been called by Diane and was devastated and needed to talk. A dozen from Margaret Whitfield, each more apologetic than the last. 3 from women I didn't know who'd apparently been at the country club and wanted to make it right. And 23 from Diane. The first few were incoherent apologies. Then came the explanations, trying to justify, to contextualize, to make me understand why she'd done it. Then anger. How dare I humiliate her like that? I could have told her privately. I'd ruined her reputation. Then more apologies. Then silence for 12 hours. Then one final message, sent at 3:47 a.m. "I've been awake all night reading about what you do, what a major general is, what you've accomplished. I didn't know. I should have known. I should have asked. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please call me. I need to see you. I need to explain. Or apologize. Or just listen. Please." I stared at it for a long time. Then I drove to my father's house. Diane answered the door. She looked like she'd aged 10 years. No makeup, hair unwashed, wearing sweatpants and one of my father's old college sweatshirts. I'd never seen her look anything less than perfectly put together. "Bryn," her voice cracked. "Thank you for coming." My father appeared behind her. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Come in, sweetheart, please." We sat in the living room, me on the sofa, them in chairs facing me, like an intervention in reverse. For a long moment, no one spoke. "I Googled you," Diane said finally, "after you left. After Margaret helped me clean cake out of my hair, and everyone left and I was alone. I sat in my car and I typed your name into my phone." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands, pulled up a page, turned it toward me. It was my official Air Force biography. The photo showed me in service dress blues, 2 stars on my shoulders, ribbons across my chest. The text listed my commands, my deployments, my decorations. Distinguished Service Medal, Legion of Merit, Bronze Star, combat missions over Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. "I read every word," Diane whispered. "Every single word. And then I read articles about what a major general does, how many people you command, what it takes to get there. And then I was sick. I actually threw up because I realized what I'd been saying about you. What I'd been telling people. That I clean toilets," I said quietly. She flinched like I'd hit her. "Yes. For 24 years. Not the whole time," she said, and then immediately, "God, listen to me, still making excuses. Not the whole time, but yes, when people asked. When I didn't want to explain. When it was easier to..." Her voice broke. "When it was easier to make you small than to admit I didn't understand your life." My father leaned forward. "Bryn, I need you to know, I didn't know she was saying that. I knew she was vague about your career, but I didn't know she was actively..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "You never asked," I said. "Either of you. In 24 years, neither of you ever asked me to sit down and actually explain what I do. You just let me be this vague embarrassment on the edge of the family." "I know," Diane said, tears were streaming down her face. "I know, and I can't take it back. I've spent 3 days trying to figure out how to explain why I did it, and the only answer I have is that I was selfish and small and so focused on what people thought of me that I never bothered to actually know you." "You told people I cleaned toilets," I repeated. I needed her to hear it, to really hear it, while I was flying missions over hostile territory. While I was commanding wings, while I was briefing senators and generals, you told your bridge club I cleaned toilets. I did. She wasn't making excuses now, wasn't trying to soften it. I told them that because it was easier than admitting I had a stepdaughter whose life I didn't understand. A stepdaughter who'd accomplished things I couldn't even begin to explain. It was easier to make you a failure than to admit I'd failed you. Something in her voice made me look at her more closely. This wasn't performance. This was raw, genuine shame. "What do you want from me?" I asked. "Nothing," she said immediately. "I don't want anything. I don't deserve anything. But I need you to know." I called every single woman who was at that lunch. I told them the truth. Not to save face, but because they deserve to know who you actually are. And I called the Bridge Club. All 37 members. I told them I'd lied. That you're a major general, that you've served with more honor and distinction than I'll ever achieve in my life. I stared at her. "And I told them," she continued, her voice shaking, "that I was ashamed, not of you, of myself. For being so caught up in appearances that I'd rather humiliate my stepdaughter than admit I'd never bothered to know her." My father's face was wet with tears. "We want to do better, Brenna, if you'll let us. We want to actually know you. Not just know about you, but know you. Your work, your life, what you've seen, what you've done." I looked at these 2 people who'd been in my life for over 2 decades, who'd sat across from me at holidays and birthdays and made polite conversation while never actually seeing me, who'd erased me, bit by bit, in ways both small and devastating. And I saw something I hadn't expected to see. Genuine remorse. Not embarrassment at being caught, not damage control. Real, painful recognition of what they'd done. "I need time," I said finally. "I need time to figure out if I can trust this. If I can trust that you're not just sorry because your friends found out. That you actually want to change." Quote, "We understand," my father said. "And if I decide to try, you need to understand something." I leaned forward. "I'm not going to perform for you. I'm not going to prove myself. I've spent 24 years being dismissed and I'm done with that. If you want to know me, you have to do the work. You have to actually care, not just pretend to care, because it's embarrassing not to. Yes, Diane said immediately. Anything, I'll do anything. Read, I said. Start with that biography. Read about my career. Read about what major generals do. Read about the Air Force. Not so you can brag to your friends. So you can understand what I've given my life to. I will, she said. I already started. And then, in a few months, if you've actually done that work, we can have dinner, just the three of us, and you can ask me questions, real questions, about what it's like to fly in combat, about what it's like to command thousands of people, about what I actually do when I deploy. And I'll answer. But only if I believe you actually care about the answers. We do, my father said, his voice thick. We care, Bryn. We should have cared all along. I stood. They stood with me. At the door, Diane caught my arm. Her grip was tight, almost desperate. Bryn, I know I don't deserve to say this, but I need you to know. I'm proud of you. I should have said that 24 years ago. I should have said it every single time you came home, but I'm saying it now. I'm so proud of you. I looked down at her hand on my arm, at this woman who'd called me an embarrassment, who'd told her friends I cleaned toilets, who'd spent 2 decades making me invisible. Thank you, I said quietly. That matters. I didn't say I forgave her. I couldn't, not yet. But I didn't pull my arm away either. I'll call in a few months, I said. We'll set up that dinner. Diane nodded, fresh tears spilling over. I'll be ready, I promise. 4 months later, we had that dinner. It was awkward at first, stilted. My father and Diane tried too hard. I was guarded, waiting for the old patterns to reassert themselves. But Diane had done the work. She'd read my biography. She'd read about Air Force command structure. She'd watched documentaries about military aviation. She'd even reached out to a retired colonel she'd met through the club and asked him to explain what my career actually meant. She asked real questions. What's it like to fly in combat conditions? How do you manage commanding thousands of people? What was the hardest decision you ever had to make? And I answered. Really answered. I told her about the Kabul evacuation, about holding a dying child on the tarmac while her mother screamed, about loading plane after plane with people who'd trusted us, knowing we were leaving thousands behind, about landing at Ramstein with 200 refugees and no beds and making it work anyway because the alternative was unthinkable. Diane cried. My father held her hand. And when I finished, she said, I can't imagine carrying that. I can't imagine being strong enough. You'd be surprised what you can carry when you have to, I said. It wasn't perfect. There were still uncomfortable silences, still moments where I could feel the weight of all those lost years, but it was real, it was honest. It was a start. We scheduled another dinner for the next month, and then another. Slowly, carefully, we began building something that looked like a relationship. Not the one we should have had, but maybe the one we could have now. Diane started introducing me correctly to her friends. No bragging, just honest. This is Brinny. She's a major general in the Air Force. She commands thousands of people. When people asked questions, she didn't deflect. She said, you should ask her. She can explain it better than I can. It was such a small thing, but it meant everything. 6 months after the country club incident, Diane came to my promotion ceremony, Lieutenant General, my 3rd star. She sat in the audience with my father and Garrett and Maria. When the Secretary of the Air Force pinned that star on my shoulder, I looked out and saw her crying. Afterward, at the reception, one of her friends, a woman I'd never met, approached me. Your stepmother talks about you constantly, she said. She's so proud of you. I looked across the room at Diane. She was talking with my father, gesturing animatedly, smiling. She looked up, caught my eye, and her smile went soft. Genuine, she mouthed. Thank you. I nodded. A year after the helicopter landing, Diane called me just to talk. No logistics to coordinate, no family event to plan, just to ask how I was doing. We talked for over an hour about nothing important, a book she was reading, a staffing problem I was dealing with, her concerns about Garrett's health. Easy conversation, the kind you have with someone who actually knows you. Before we hung up, she said, I love you, Bryn. I should have said that more. I paused. Then, I love you too. And I meant it. It's not the relationship I should have had, it's not the relationship I deserved to have from the beginning. But it's real, it's honest, it's built on actual knowledge of who I am, not who Diane wanted me to be or was afraid I might be, and that's something. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that moment at the country club. Diane on her knees in red velvet frosting, the entire room watching, the helicopter's rotor wash shaking the windows. I don't take joy in her humiliation. I never did. What I wanted, what I'd always wanted, was just to be seen, to matter to my family the way everyone else's careers mattered, to not be the embarrassing one, the one they didn't talk about. I got that, eventually, not because of the helicopter, but because of what came after. The hard conversations, the genuine apologies, the slow, painful work of building trust from nothing. The helicopter just forced us to start. People sometimes ask me if I regret how it happened, if I wish I'd handled it differently, told her privately instead of letting her find out in front of everyone. I don't know. Maybe if I'd been less exhausted, less hurt, I would have. Maybe I would have called her after the mission and said, "We need to talk about what you've been telling people." But I also think she'd had 24 years to ask, 24 years to care, 24 years to see me, and she'd chosen, over and over, to look away. Sometimes people need to be shocked into seeing what they've been avoiding. Sometimes the truth has to land with enough force to break through decades of careful avoidance. I learned something in the year after that country club lunch. Revenge is hollow. Dignity is everything. The moment I wanted wasn't Diane fainting into the cake. It was the moment, months later, when she asked me a real question and actually listened to the answer. When she looked at me and saw me, not the idea of me, not the version of me she'd constructed to make herself comfortable, but the actual person I am. That's what reclaiming your narrative looks like. Not humiliation, not proving someone wrong, just being seen, finally, completely, honestly seen. And then choosing, despite everything, despite the hurt and the anger and the years of invisibility, to let them try again. To build something real from the ashes of what should have been. That's not weakness, that's not letting them off easy. That's strength, that's grace. That's me, taking back my story and deciding how it ends. And it ends like this, with my family finally knowing who I am. With relationships that are messy and imperfect but built on truth. With a stepmother who tells people, proudly, that her daughter is a lieutenant general in the United States Air Force. With me, no longer invisible. Finally, blessedly, impossibly, seen.